Hey everyone, welcome to today's installment of Fit 2.0, 15 minutes with Fit 2.0, and hopefully we'll stick closely to the 15 minutes, even though we never have. Maybe we'll get better at that as the year grows older. Today, Jen is with me, Jen from Fit 2.0, and she's here to talk to us about thinness and Asian culture. And we're so lucky to have her. A recent article on everyday feminism kind of inspired, my dogs are trying to come in, inspired this discussion. It was about thinness and Asian culture. And we have our very own Chinese-Canadian expert on the subject, so we decided to do a whole show on it. So welcome, Jen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's start out by just tell us about your experience growing up in Asian culture and as somebody who may not always have fit the thin ideal.
I've never fit the thin ideal. So I grew up Chinese Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver, which actually has a pronounced Asian population. And growing up, it was very evident that thin was the ideal, and it was also very apparent that I wasn't. I've had sisters and cousins who were slender and delicate, and they're all very lovely, and I was not thin. It wasn't that necessarily that I was even fat. I was just not thin. And I think the prevailing kind of adjective would have been chunky, as if I was peanut butter. But, and I remember at a really, like when I was 8, 9 years old, just recognizing that I needed to lose weight. And at that, and it was like just all the messaging coming in. And when you're growing up in a Chinese Canadian family, everybody makes comments about your body, right? There's always this aunties and relatives poking and pinching and prodding and making comments about your thighs and your tummy and how much you're eating, right? And so, and as I grew and I became it's into high school and adolescence, that continued on, and I got to the point of where I even had some twat canoe took to calling me thunder thighs. And not even just calling me thunder thighs, but yelling across the hallway thunder thighs whenever I walked past, right? Oh. And I wasn't, the things that I wasn't, I was average sized, right? When I look back, there was nothing wrong with my body, it's just somebody decided to be a jerk, right? But it all kind of fed in to this disordered, kind of idealization of thinness, right? And then, once I moved, from high school into college, and I was going through high school, I was awkward. That's the only word I have for myself, is awkward, right? And I didn't really know where I fit in and, who I even was or wanted to be and what I wanted to, strive to be. And as I moved into college and, as a young woman of color that self-identified as being a feminist, right? And so I was trying to reconcile the one side that wanted to be, empowered and independent and strong, and that was in turmoil with this desire to fit into this ideal of thinness, right? And so, when I was growing up, I mean, as you learn not only is your body what you eat, it's everybody's business. Everybody apparently has the right to tell you what they think about it, and this is something that I find a lot of non-Asians that find themselves in Asian environments all of a sudden are at the receiving end of. And I've had a number of non-Asian friends commented oh, I went to Japan and everybody was commenting about my weight, and I was like, well, and I was like, yeah, and it's in some ways within the culture, body shaming is the norm, and all too often it's brushed aside as cultural, so that's just how Asians are, right? And just because it's cultural, people think it's a beyond reproach, and I call bullshit on that. It's rude, it's inappropriate, it's disordered, right? And just because it's cultural doesn't mean it shouldn't be challenged, it shouldn't be questioned, right? And so I think, you know, it's even talking about it now and having articles like the one that was published by Everyday Feminism. I mean, it's opening up the dialogue, and the dialogue needs to happen within the Asian community as much as the larger community. It's within the Asian community. I grew up with, you know, the idea of any sort of mental health issue being, you know, you just don't talk about it. There's still a lot of stigma around that. There's still a lot of stigma around even, you know, looking for help and counseling, right? And so how does, you know, so you have this situation where very disordered body image issues and disordered eating are considered normal, right? And so anybody who's actually looking for help is going to have, you know, very little resources to turn to within their own community until we start talking about it and we bring it to light.
Right.
So
it sounds like Western culture taken to an even greater extreme. Like your body as a young woman was not your own. It was everybody else's to comment on and make judgments about, and that was seen as perfectly appropriate, and, you know, nobody saw that as rude or not their business. And then you have to conform to, not only do you have to conform to what is really sort of an extreme ideal, but then when it inevitably creates internal conflict, you have nowhere to turn for help, because everybody's telling you it's normal and it's fine and it's culture, and it's weak to have it's weak to seek help for, you know, mental health issues. Does that sound about right?
yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's strange because it's this praising of thinness is actually relatively a new phenomenon. It's only probably been like the, you know, the prevalent sort of message in the last generation or so. Because prior to that, I mean, you get the opposite. People would actually praise you for putting on weight,
Right.
because that showed that you were successful and prosperous and you could afford to actually get an adequate amount of food in you, right? Because most Asian cultures, generation 2 back, were, you know, they were developing countries. People didn't have enough to eat, right? And so I mean, at the same time, the praising of either extreme is disordered and unhealthy, right? And so it's not even, and for me, it's not even about being anti-thin. I mean, that's not what this is at all about. And it's more than just the ideal of thinness. And, you know, one thing that caught me was when I realized it's more about thin being normalized as the only expectation for Asian women, right? And that, when I hit on that note, and I was like, wait a minute, like there's something really messed up about that message, that, you know, in order to be an Asian, like to be Asian means to be thin, right? And it's just messed up, right? So, well, yeah.
And if you're not thin, that should be the thing you strive for above all else.
Well, yeah, and it's like even if you are thin, you're worried about you're worried about putting on weight. You're worried about, you know, when you're not being thin. So even there's a preoccupation of thinness, even no matter what your weight is.
Right.
Right, because you can never achieve that ideal.
Yeah. So what do you see happening in the Asian culture in order to maintain that thin ideal?
So
I mean,
there's a lot of extreme dieting. I mean, the diet industry in Asia is just through the roof. It makes the North American culture seem really tame. You know, it's disordered. There's a lot of you know, it's like fad diets everywhere. Everybody's detoxing. Everybody's, you know, using the latest magic pill. People are going to spas and getting, like, you know, those electrodes buzzing through their muscles and all that stuff. And it's you know, and beyond that, I mean, it's like there's a culture of constant dieting, right? You're constantly watching what you eat, and, you know, the whole idea of the 400-calorie diet is the norm for a lot of young women, right? And that's scary as all heck, right?
Yes.
Whether they're actually, you know, taking in 400 calories or not, I mean, it's still scary that they feel they need to restrict to that level in order to, you know, achieve some sort of success, right? So there's a lot of that, and you know, and it's one of those sort of phenomenons where, you know, you hear, celebrities and, you know, what they're doing for detoxing and getting rid of weight and whatever not, right? And it very, very quickly pervades to the larger population, right? And you have, I mean, and like, you know, and coupling with all that are like the other aspects of this sort of aspiration and of this otherness ideal, right? And this goes in the realm of, you know, plastic surgery to look more non-Asian, i.e. white, right? So there's a lot of other compounding things that come into play that's become, you know, again, the norm, right? And that's where it starts. You kind of lose kind of sight of the realities around you, and you're kind of focused on this kind of distorted ideal, and that becomes your new reality.
Wow. So are eating disorders recognized as an issue in Asian culture?
No, because everybody's got one. It's disordered eating, and, you know, habits of starving and binging are normalized to some extent. Going on diets are normalized. You know, people put their children on diets at a very young age. There's a lot of I mean, you know, I learned about cupping in college amongst other kind of, there was a clique of Hong Kong students, and they do something called cupping, and that's basically they would sit around, they would with food, and they would put the food in their mouth, chew it, and then spit it out, and that's how they consume their meals.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's messed up, right? But to them it was like it was kind of that social thing that, and actually they had cliques of girls doing this. And it was to me, I was like, okay, that's a little messed up. But to them, it was the way that they could actually socialize with food without having to consume it, right?
And that's promoted as normal?
They were like, they were inviting others to do it, right? And it was frightening, right?
So it was right out there. They weren't trying to hide it. That it was just the way that they socialized.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, and it's so there's, I mean, there's not only is there pressure to be thin, there is no other ideal, right? So within the Asian culture, there is no voluptuous, there is no athletic, there is no curvy, there's very little representation of anything else but thin, and not just thin, but extremely thin, right? So for me, the lack of range is troubling, right? Especially as, you know, trying to promote, you know, health and a balanced, you know, relationship with your body and all that, you know, when there's only a very slim, pardon the pun, range of the body type being represented. And you know, so it's hard to kind of open up that dialogue, right? And there's been some efforts and some movement, and some of them I kind of find them a little as troubling as, you know, as this praising of thinness. I mean, so things like the Marshmallow Girls, which is like a Japanese pop culture trend that came up a couple of years ago. And so these are girls that don't meet the thin ideal. So, and so this promotion of, you know, and I think the term they use is pudgy. They specifically avoid the word fat, because you can't use the word fat and still be attractive, right? So they call them Marshmallow Girls, and it still has an undercurrent of fat shaming, right? Because they're not fat, right? They're just a little pudgy. They're marshmallow girls with cute little pudgy, you know, marshmallow tummies, right? And so the Marshmallow Girls are portrayed in a very cutesy, infantile way. They're dressed in flowy, pastel-y outfits, 8-year-old girls, right?
Okay.
So many levels with that.
So it's okay not to be thin as long as you look like and act like a child.
Yeah, right. But that kind of carries on with a lot of the sort of overarching stereotypes that Asian women have to, deal with, right? So, I mean, for a lot of Asian women, it's that kind of being non-threatening. That's the overarching goal, to be non-threatening. Because once you go into that go out of that non-threatening range, you all of a sudden become like a dragon lady, right? And so, but and like just so there's that construct within Asian culture, and so me growing up here in North America, the beauty standards here, obviously, they're based on Caucasian white criteria, right? And so I find that automatically we start off at a disadvantage because we're being measured against that white beauty barometer. And so there's actually been some interesting research that has been done that indicates that Asian and other minorities they're more vulnerable to eating disorders, partly because they are starting much further away from the Caucasian beauty standard, right? And then, so when you take all that in consideration, along with the whole idea that Asians are naturally thin, that we carry some magic super metabolism gene that burns through all fat and calories, and that we can eat whatever we want and stay thin, right? And you bundle that up with a stereotype that all Asian women are delicate and small and demure, and you layer on top of that a nice little fetishization of Asian women, in the Western culture, in the media, and they constantly, they're these passive vessels of sex, right? They're the gateway, the concubine, the delicate cherry blossom cheeked ingenue, pouring tea and walking on your back bullshit, right? And so you take all that together and you end up, not just this ideal of thinness, but the expectation that all Asian women are naturally thin. We are thin because we are Asian, right? And therefore, if you are not thin, you have failed your genetic destiny, right? Yes. Congratulations, you managed to out-eat your genetics, right? You are therefore a bad Asian, right? And even if you are thin, right, you can always be thinner. Then therefore you can be more Asian and more beautiful, right? And so you have this, this kind of building up, this momentum, to this, this disordered sort of, momentum of ideals, right? And then it's culturally, this kind of leads to preoccupation amongst Asian cultures for not to be thin, but even thinner. So dieting is the default. You're supposed to worry about your weight no matter what you weigh. You don't need to, either you have to lose weight or you're worrying about having, the possibility of gaining weight. And again, all this thinking has been normalized. It's part of, the regular kind of cultural sort of dialogue. It's the default state, right?
It's the way it is.
Yeah, it's just the way it is, and it's fine as far as they're all concerned. And I'm just like, wait a minute, it's messed up, it's unbalanced, right? And the preoccupation with it leads to some very unhealthy, destructive habits.
I bet. So not only do you have the cultural pressure from your Asian culture to be thin, you've got the additional pressure from Western culture to be demure and non-threatening and passive. It sounds crushing, to be honest. I mean, I don't, what I've experienced as a white woman in this culture pales in comparison to what I'm hearing from you. I can't even imagine the weight of those expectations.
No, there's, I mean, and it's definitely like, and I do see it more and more. And like when I can recognize it now looking back, right? But obviously when I was growing up in my teens, mid-20s, and even my 30s, it was like I mean, and like, the larger Asian, the culture and traditional values, and, the strive for success and meeting up with all these family expectations, you know, and it's a culture that is in some ways it's shame based, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't dare do wrong because it'll reflect badly on your family.
It'll bring shame upon your family. Yeah.
So you have all that, you know, piled onto you, and you're kind of like, and so for a lot of young women, the one way to actually control all this craziness is actually just to control themselves and control how much food they put into themselves. And so eating disorder is then this tool for perfection and to be able to succeed on at least on one level, right? They may not be, you know, be able to be successful career-wise or school. You know, they're dealing with all this other family pressure, and the one thing they can do is control how many calories they put into their body.
Right.
And they can be very good at it.
I can imagine that if you had to put that much energy into staying thin, there wouldn't be a lot of energy left to pursue a career or outside interests. I mean, I imagine it must be all consuming.
Well, and there really wasn't, I mean, yes, you're told to go to school and told to get, you know, a degree and get all the good stuff, but that's to get a husband.
Right.
Right. So so it all kind of fed into that whole process, right? And so the whole idea of, you know, pursuing careers and passions and, you know, exploring life and the world beyond, right, wasn't really part of that messaging. Right. And, you know, yeah, and you're right. Who would have energy for that?
Yeah.
Right.
Sounds like you kind of internalize this message that you exist for other people to consume and control, and you know what you want out of life is not relevant. It's your existence is boiled down to how other people can consume you as a product, you know.
Pretty much.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's why I said, like,
how did that affect you as an individual? What were some of the things you found yourself doing to try to meet the expectations?
So I've had my history with disordered eating, and I've gone, like, I went through a period in my late teens of I had lost both my grandmothers within months of each other. One was the kind of expected, the other one was completely out of the blue, right? And I fell into my first period of depression. And so for me, when I'm going through certain emotional strains and such, I lose my appetite. And so I just didn't eat. I didn't feel, and then with that, then came the anxiety of like, oh my God, the world's changing. I need to get my shit together. I can't control anything. And, you know, suddenly, like, with all this weight dropping off, I was like, I can control that, right? And it was messed up looking back now, how many compliments I got on my weight loss, right? And it was, and it just, it fed itself, right? And, you know, and you don't, at that time, again, you know, like, there's so much stigma around mental health. My parents knew something was up, but they didn't know how to talk to me about it, right? And it wasn't until I actually got into college that I actually, you know, found, you know, a counselor on campus to talk to and to start unpacking some of this stuff. But even after that, I was still struggling trying to fit into the ideal.
Now I have a dog in here. I'm sorry. So you got to college and you finally found your way to a therapist. That must have been, how is seeking help for depression and eating disorder behavior, how is that seen in Asian culture?
You don't do it. It's you don't talk about it. It's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of kind of like hush. You don't talk about that. You know, or just pull up your bootstraps and just get to it. You know, sort of mentality about it. And it's unfortunate because it just keeps perpetuating generation to another generation. You know, and you know, for me, looking now, you know, in my 40s, looking to the generation coming up, and they certainly do have, there is, there's a freshness and there's a bit of, there's a zeal, there's a little bit more empowerment, but the messagings that they're getting and the images they're getting are that much more extreme than what I was even brought up with, right? And so I'm kind of looking at all that going, like, I didn't have, the level of extreme thinness that they are dealing with now.
Sorry, I was my dog. Hold on. Dinner time. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So another thing that I wanted to ask you about is how deeply food is ingrained into the culture, and how the disconnect between the food and the messages that you shouldn't eat. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so this is where it all just kind of comes together and blows right up, right? Because Asians love to eat. We're a food-centric culture, right? And like when we meet each other on the street, our usual greeting is to ask the other person if they've eaten yet. That's how ingrained food is to us, right? And so, and like, we're like, Asians are renowned for having, like, Chinese will have 10-course meals. Like, that's how we celebrate anything, right? So there's food all over the place, and everybody's a food pusher. It's like, heaven forbid if you have an empty bowl, right? Because everybody's mother and their auntie is going to be shoveling food onto your bowl, right? So you have this. So you have this, and it's, and on one hand, it's a fun celebratory food tradition, right? But it gets sometimes to when you mix it in with this messaging about thinness, you have the recipe for like a culturally prescribed starved binge cycle, right? Where you starve, you starve yourself, for weeks, in anticipation for this big feast, so you can show up, a little thinner, and then have everybody pile food on your plate, right? Yay! Yeah. So yeah, so there's that element to it. And for me, I mean, like, food still for me is, I mean, and I've through eating the food and work with you guys and Fit2point0, I've been able to come back to a place where food is a place of enjoyment and celebration. It's where I come together with friends and family and enjoy that social time, and it's also a way that I can take care of myself, right? And it's taken a lot of work to get to that point. And and I will say that part of what has helped is that I have been away from that culture. I've moved away from the Asian culture, at least in my immediate environment. So I'm not inundated with all that messaging all the time, right? I live in a small little, one sled town in the Arctic, right? So I don't have to deal with it in my face all the time. And that actually helped me kind of get some, get a bit of buffer and have some space to actually explore these ideas. Yeah.
That's lucky that you managed to escape. I apologize for my dog. Time, and he knows it. Okay, so I think we've covered the history, your experiences. Can you really quick just tell us, you've kind of touched on this, some of the things that you've done to create a healthier environment for yourself, to set some boundaries, especially setting boundaries for your family and culture in general, so that those messages kind of bounce off. What have you done?
So I've recognized that I put up boundaries in terms of how people can even talk to me. I don't want to hear anything about my body, right? So that's one step.
I think that's fantastic. Do people respect that?
No, No. But for me, it's me recognizing that I need to respect that, right? And people will follow along, and and it's some follow, some don't. And for me, it's also been a matter of giving myself the time to unpack things for myself, and then to recalibrate what I want for me, what I want from myself, from my body, right? And that was a tough question. Like, that took years to actually try to figure out what do I want from me, right? Without all this other external messaging, right? And it takes a lot of work, and it definitely takes, and you find yourself clashing with yourself a lot, right? And that's fine. It's perfectly fine to be struggling that way. For me, it was also it's been really awesome to be able to talk about food and body without those sort of loaded connotations, and to be able to talk about it and to explore the ideas of it, to be able to just discuss those words, the word fat, right, in an open, honest sort of manner, right? And that's really kind of how I can approach language in a different way. And that for me has been really important. But yeah, and then the rest of the stuff is just kind of me, going out of my way to do what brings me my joy, right? And to figure out the activities that I love to do, and to be able to provide myself with the time and energy and the capabilities to be able to do those things, on a regular basis, and recognize, okay, like, my life has shifted because this is now what I want to focus on, and all the other stuff, that's just noise, that's background. I don't need to deal with that, and I've given myself like kind of the space to, for a little while I was involved and embedded in Asian Canadian sort of cultural politics and online forms and stuff. Oh, hi, Ned.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He's like, I'm going to demonstrate for you.
How hungry I am.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to mute my phone right now and let you talk.
Okay. So, yeah, but giving myself the space to be able to figure out kind of my own voice, my own narrative, to be able to even just, give myself the space to explore my own pleasures, to reconnect with food on, on all the different levels, from me personally. And I love to cook, and I love cooking for others. I also love others cooking for me, but also, like, look at food on a social level and a cultural level. And I happen to be, living in this little Arctic town. Food in some ways is very similar culturally, in that, people come together, there's feasts a lot. There's a lot of community feasting happening up here. So people come together and they socialize, and they have this huge potluck, and it's wonderful. And the kids are running around and making a lot of noise. And so the fun and the celebration of that on a very simple level for me has been very grounding. Right? So instead of looking at food and worrying about how many calories there is in there, I'm looking at food as seeing as a great way to bridge, my life with, the people in this community. And that to me has been very, very powerful. It's something that I didn't really acknowledge or really recognize until recently, just how important that was for me, right? And then, for me now, it's like I've now, proactively, I try to have a few more sort of like social events, have little stitch and bitch and potlucks at my place, and just recognize that I can be around food and I don't have the anxieties that I used to have around them. So that's been really awesome for me. Nope.
That's fantastic. I love that. So you've sort of immersed yourself in a culture that views food in a very different way.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I wish we all could do that.
You just gotta move up here.
I think that if it weren't for the month-long night, I could handle it. And also, my dogs don't have any fur, so they would don't like it.
Well, I can knit them a sweater.
Oh!
There you go.
All right. My dog has eaten. He's much happier now, but now he's just making lots of noise. So again, I apologize. Do you have anything that you'd like to say just to wrap up?
We need to talk about this. We need to talk about, disordered body image and body dysmorphia in the Asian culture. We need to talk about eating disorders. We need to talk about extreme dieting and what it's doing to, this coming generation. And, we got to open up the dialogue, and we got to, start recognizing that this is an issue that we need to work together to deal with, and it isn't something that, is going to go away. And it's leading to a lot of unhealthy and destructive habits, amongst both men and women are dealing with this. And so it's something that we need to actually be conscious of and recognize and call it out, and and stop dismissing it as cultural, right? You gotta stop brushing it away and actually deal with it for what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it may be cultural, but that doesn't mean it's healthy, and that doesn't mean that it's helping anyone. Yeah. We can change culture. I mean, I've seen us do it on a small scale with the fitness industry, and it's growing every day. There's no reason that we can't change Western culture and Eastern culture. There's no reason that we can't make it better.
No, there isn't any reason. We just got to keep, putting ourselves out there. We got to keep the dialogue going. And yeah, I mean, and culture is dynamic. It has to change. Yes.
I mean, as you mentioned earlier, it didn't used to be this way. It is now, but it wasn't before. So obviously it can change again.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I apologize again for my obnoxious dog. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jen. Viewers can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, Fit2point0 Facebook page, Disrupt Your Diet blog and Facebook page, Gocalio blog and Facebook page. Jen, you've got to put together a website.
I'll work on it.
Okay, good. Because I think you're the only Fit 2.0 leader that does not have a website.
I know.
Yeah. If only to sell your beautiful knitting creations. I would buy them. Jen made me this gorgeous neck warmer out of ox fur?
Muskox is Kiviot. It's Kiviot. It's those muskox fur. Yeah.
Oh wow, it's so soft. It's unbelievably soft. I have it right there. It's just, of course, I'm not going to show it to you. Actually, no, I'm not. It's too far away. I can't reach it. But it's gorgeous, and I would love to have more Jen Lamb creations, and yeah. So thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to get on the mailing list and to subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss future broadcasts. And we will see you on Facebook and in the next video. Bye, Jen.
Bye.
Bye, everybody else.